Putin is done. Those are the words uttered by Peter Zeihan during a June 2024 interview with the Times Radio. Zeihan is an expert on geopolitics who has worked with Fortune 500 firms. The author of several books including The End of the World is Just Beginning and Disunited Nations, Zeihan made this claim in a reference to the future of both Putin and Russia's army. At various points during the interview, Zeihan argues that Putin is slowly losing his grip on power and that Ukraine is well positioned to launch a counter-offensive in the summer of 2024. That brings us to today's video. We're going to explore Zeihan's reasoning for his claims and highlight some of the issues that could lead to Putin ultimately losing the war in Ukraine. So is Putin really done? Zeihan's justifications for that claim start with the arrival of Patriot weapon systems and Western fighter jets in Ukraine. Starting with the Patriot systems, the Times Radio interviewer noted that the US had just announced that it would send another of those systems at a cost of $1.1 billion to Ukraine, adding that it's something that Ukraine badly needs. Each of these systems is capable of firing a 17-foot missile, with said munitions being equipped with a track-via missile targeting system that enables mid-course corrections while it's en route to its target. The missile can fly for 43 miles, reaching a maximum altitude of around 15 miles, and comes packed with a 198-pound warhead. They're extremely powerful weapons. Their manufacturer, RTX, says that Patriot missiles can intercept ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as take out drones and other advanced aerial threats. And it's this, Zeihan claims, that makes the delivery of more of them such a vital win for Ukraine. He says that it's important for people to think of what these Patriot systems can offer Ukraine over the next several months, as opposed to considering what has been happening during the early stages of 2024. The Ukrainians needed more air defense, claims Zeihan, and the Russians were taking advantage of a lull in weapons deliveries to basically hit the Ukrainians with all kinds of air-based weapon systems. With more Patriots, Ukraine can shore up its aerial defenses. They alone won't be enough, however, as Patriot missile systems can only cover a limited, albeit somewhat broad, area, even though they have a long firing range. Where they really become important in terms of Putin losing his grip on the territory Russia has claimed in Ukraine, says Zeihan, is where they're used in combination with the Western fighter jets that are on their way to the country. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, NATO member nations have committed to sending at least 65 F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. These jets, which are anticipated to enter service toward the end of 2024, won't be enough to grant Ukraine total air superiority over its own territory. They're too few in number, and even though Russia's aerial offensives have faltered, could be overwhelmed with sheer numbers. Instead, these jets, along with a shipment of several Mirage 2000 jets from France, would allow Ukraine to create brief pockets of aerial superiority. Those pockets could make a massive difference, according to Zeihan, who says that creating them massively increases the capacity of the Ukrainian military to launch strikes. Every offensive the Ukrainians have attempted for the last 12 months has bogged down because they don't have air superiority, Zeihan says. That will change through a combination of Patriot missile systems and the arrival of Western fighter jets. For the first time since the war began, Ukraine will be able to conduct offensives with aerial support. That means ground troops will be able to move quickly and in large numbers because they face fewer threats from Russia's artillery. For example, Ukraine could use Patriot missiles to disable aerial threats while relying on its F-16s to take out the artillery that typically peppers Ukrainian troops as they attempt to advance. This approach would not require Ukraine to establish total aerial dominance. Instead, it would create pockets of superiority, allowing for troop movements and offensives that can retake positions Russia has claimed. Ukraine will have more time to do things like clear mines on the battlefield and prepare for its attacks. Those attacks will also be more coordinated because they're not starting in conditions where Ukrainian troops are simply trying to survive artillery barrages. The stage could thus be set for counter-offensives that retake Ukrainian territory. In short, Russia starts to lose territory thanks to Ukraine's stronger aerial threat. Of course, there's an obvious counterpoint to Zeihan's argument here. What's to stop Russia from using its own anti-air defenses to prevent Ukraine from achieving these pockets of aerial superiority? The answer lies in the S-400 Triumph Surface-to-Air, or SAM, missile system. Designed by Russia and entering service in 2007, the S-400 is supposed to be somewhat equivalent to America's Patriot missile systems. Missile Threat says that it's capable of shooting down cruise missiles, unmanned aerial vehicles, and aircraft, which should make it perfect for deploying against Ukraine's incoming F-16s. It's powerful too. Each S-400 missile can travel up to 248 miles and can carry a warhead weighing up to 315 pounds. Looking at the specifications alone, the S-400 is more powerful and rangier than Ukraine's Patriot missile systems, meaning that it should be more than capable enough of taking out F-16s and incoming missiles. But there's a problem. Russia has deployed S-400 systems frequently during the Ukraine war, and unfortunately for Putin, they've proven far less effective than Russia had anticipated. In September 2023, Newsweek reported that Ukraine was increasingly cutting away at Russia's supply of S-400s. The outlet reports that Russia had 96 of these SAM systems available at the beginning of 2023, with reports suggesting those numbers were being whittled down by the month. Quoting the Dutch open-source intelligence agency Oryx, Newsweek says that Russia had lost key components of at least 5 of its S-400 batteries in Crimea by September 2023. The situation has only gotten worse for Russia as the war moved into 2024. Writing for Forbes in June of that year, military commentator David Axe noted that a mid-May barrage of 10 Army tactical missile system rockets struck a base in Belbek within occupied Crimea. Each of these rockets weighed 2 tons and exploded to release hundreds of grenade-sized bomblets, creating a cluster bomb effect that devastated the Russian base. Among the equipment damaged there were 4 warplanes, along with a pair of S-400 launchers and a radar system. Russia replaced the S-400s. Ukraine bombed them again. This time, Ukraine took out 2 more S-400s, as well as one of Russia's older S-300 SAM systems. In short, Axe said, Ukraine is now in a position where it can take out Russia's S-400s as quickly as Russia can replace them in occupied Crimea. All of that brings us back to Zeihan's claims that Putin is losing his grip on power. Russia is soon going to face a Ukraine that can not only establish limited pockets of aerial superiority, but can also take out the very anti-air defenses Russia relies upon to prevent that superiority from happening. Worse yet, the destruction of so many S-400s leaves Putin with egg on his face, as what's supposed to be the most advanced SAM unit in the world has proven to be extremely vulnerable to Ukrainian weapons. That's not just a problem for Putin in terms of his attempts to project Russian power. Incidents like these are also reducing the interest that other countries have in Russian weapons. Zeihan highlights India as one of these nations, noting that the loss of so many S-400s is showing that Russia's weapons aren't as capable as advertised to the nations that were buying them. In India's case, Politico noted in April 2024 that Russia would practically lose all of its customers from India in the coming months. The war in Ukraine has exposed the fabled prowess of Russian weaponry as a myth, the report claims. In truth, India's imports of Russian weapons have been declining before the Ukraine war. Between 2009 and 19, 76% of India's weapon imports came from Russia. That number has dropped to just 36% during the last 5 years, with Politico noting that it's likely to fall to 0 very soon. Given that India has earmarked $100 billion for future weapon procurement, Putin faces a doubly bad situation when it comes to selling his weapons. Russia's biggest customer is jumping ship, costing the country a huge slice of that $100 billion, and it's likely going to spend the bulk of that money on Western weapons instead. Russia is weakened and the West is empowered. That's the opposite of what Putin hopes to achieve with the Ukraine war, which was intended to be a projection of Russian power and a demonstration of the country's ability to easily win a war. Instead, Russia has been bogged down in a war of attrition that's seen it lose an aura of invulnerability that Putin has spent the last 2 decades cultivating. With that loss of the aura, Zeihan suggests, may come the loss of Putin's hold over Russia. It gets even worse for Putin. Combine the loss of so many S-400 SAMs with the destruction of around a third of Russia's dreaded Black Sea fleet, and you have a situation in which Russia could conceivably lose Crimea. The region, which was controlled by Ukraine until Russia annexed it in 2014, is at risk of becoming a non-factor in the war due to Ukraine's tactics. Could it be just literally a matter of time until Ukraine can shut down Russia in Crimea, cutting it off and stopping Russia's ability to support the war from there? Zeihan asks during the interview. Answering himself, he claims that is definitely the goal for Ukraine. However, even if Ukraine isn't able to liberate Crimea, Zeihan notes, it's in a strong tactical position to at least damage it extensively. That would cause major problems for Russia on the logistical front, given that Crimea is one of the country's main routes into Ukraine. Zeihan points out that Russia has 2 routes in and out of Crimea, a rail route that tracks through Mariupol and the Kerch Bridge. Both are vulnerable to Ukrainian strikes, with the latter having already been targeted. In April 2024, The Guardian reported that Ukraine had already conducted 2 drone strikes on the bridge, with a third likely being considered for some point in 2024. Zeihan agrees that the bridge will likely be a target, noting that Ukraine could probably target and destroy it right now, but is likely waiting until it receives more military capacity. Why does this matter in the context of Putin's grip on power? When you do that, Crimea goes from being a launch pad for Russian assaults to simply the most vulnerable part of the Russian landmass, claims Zeihan. The loss of Crimea, or merely the loss of the ability to use it to keep troops supplied on the Ukrainian mainland, would be a huge blow to Putin. Strategically, Russia's army would weaken due to the logistical problems Ukrainian strikes would create. With no bridges and destroyed rail routes, Russia would be forced to use its Black Sea fleet to ship supplies into Ukraine. A third of that fleet has already been destroyed. And thanks to Turkey's control over the Turkish Straits, which leads into the Black Sea, Russia is unable to replenish the Black Sea fleet with new ships. Putin would face a logistical disaster, and one that would only get worse as time went on and Ukraine destroyed more of the Black Sea fleet. Then there's the symbolic aspect of taking Crimea. If Ukraine is able to not only destroy logistical routes, but enter Crimea and retake it from Russia, Putin would experience a massive shot to his power projection. He will lose what he considers Russian territory, again seeing the aura of invulnerability that surrounded both him and Russia getting chipped away. Still, the taking of Crimea is far from an inevitability, and may not even be possible, unless Ukraine receives even more weapons. Even so, Putin is still in a position where Ukraine can damage Crimea, destroy Russia's logistical solutions, and take out ships and weapons that Putin believed would be effective in the war. Putin's grip on power loosens further. That brings us to another problem that Putin faces: Western nations allowing Ukraine to use weapons they supply inside Russia. Several have done so already, with the UK essentially claiming that Ukraine can use the missiles it supplies in whatever way they see fit, while Germany and the US have also given their seal of approval. In the case of the latter, that approval is conditional. Ukraine can only use American weapons in the Kharkiv region to strike Russia directly behind the border to prevent strikes in Kharkiv itself. The US has also taken things a step further. In June 2024, it lifted a decade-long ban on the Azov Brigade, which had barred the transfer of weaponry and the use of US-supplied training to the group. This was a controversial step. The ban was in place because the Azov Brigade has neo-Nazi origins, which Russia has taken full advantage of in its propaganda by claiming that the US is now flirting with Nazis to get what it wants. America thinks differently. It says the Azov Brigade has passed a series of stringent tests based on the Leahy vetting process, finding that there is no evidence of gross violations of human rights committed by the 12th Brigade Azov. What does this mean for Russia and Ukraine? Ukraine gets a huge boost, and the Azov Brigade is one of the most battle-hardened units and will offer advantages on the battlefield. As for Russia, the approval showcases that Western nations, particularly the US, are becoming less escalation-phobic as the war drags on. Zeihan claims that these moves represent the US becoming even more willing to cross red lines in how it's dealing with Russia. Red line is a term used by the Russian Federation to refer to any geopolitical action that it believes could damage the country's position. The use of Western or NATO-provided weaponry within Russia is one of those red lines. So far, Zeihan claims, the West has crossed 34 of these lines, with the use of Western military technology being the most recent. Why does crossing these red lines matter to Putin? The simple answer is that every instance of crossing a red line has been met with threats of retaliation by Russia. However, none of those threats have been realized. Zeihan says that it's likely that Russia's red line threats were intended to slow down Western involvement, giving it more time to damage Ukraine, so the increasing crossing of them now represents the West taking a more aggressive approach to Russia. So Putin now faces a twofold problem that could weaken his grip on power. With Western approval, Ukraine has already started striking targets within Russia. Zeihan brings up Ukraine's targeting of a radar system nestled a couple of hundred miles within Russia that was designed to help with ballistic missile defense. Those types of strategic assets are now on the table for Ukraine, meaning it can not only chip away at the Russian war machine within its territory, but also take out supporting equipment inside Russia. The result is the opening up of more opportunities for Ukrainian counteroffensives due to the weakening of Russia's military. Secondly, and perhaps far more worryingly for Putin, the West's willingness to allow Ukraine to use its weapons suggests that the West no longer takes him seriously. At least not so seriously that it believes his threats of imminent retaliation for crossing a red line. This doesn't mean that the West believes war with Russia isn't possible in the future. Even as far back as January 2024, NATO officials were claiming that the organization needed to be ready for war. That month saw NATO Military Committee Chief Rob Bauer claim, "We have to realize it's not a given that we are in peace, and that's why we are preparing for a conflict with Russia." So the problem for Putin isn't that the West flat out doesn't believe he might retaliate, it's that the West is getting ready to fight back, meaning Putin's constant attempts to project power are failing. And that brings us to another of Zeihan's justifications for his opinion that Putin is losing his grip on power. The Russian political system is built around the concept of a strongman. Russian politics are quirky, claims Zeihan. It's a strongman system, and it's always been a strongman system. Putin specifically rules through the intelligence service, which is a combination of the rule of terror and the rule of infiltration. While that form of rule is fairly stable, in the sense that it allows Putin to generally get what he wants done, it's also fairly brittle. One big change could topple the whole thing. With that image weakened, it may only take one major event, such as the starving out of Crimea or the loss of the war entirely, to finally put an end to Putin's time as Russia's president. But what do you think? Is there any chance that Putin may lose his seat of power before the Ukraine war ends, or is his position stronger than Zeihan suggests? Share your opinions in the comments, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out why Russia is on the brink of collapse, or click this other video instead.